So we are talking this week about, I guess it's really about spiritual maturity, and
Yeah.
the question this week is, why do I keep failing? How did you
Yeah.
phrase that?
Why can't I stop?
Why can't I stop?
Yeah.
And you're just essentially talking about bad sin habits.
Yeah. Like it is kind of perplexing, or at least I kind of feel that when I became a Christian, I assumed that that was kind of the finish line, you
Yeah.
know, and to become a Christian, to go to CG, to get baptized, to do all the things, and then get on the other end of that and be like, why am I still struggling with all this?
Yeah.
It's confusing.
But there's kind of a misnomer in the way that I don't want to say it's our fault as preachers in the way that we present the gospel, but we really do kind of
We
hit
set
home.
people up for that a little
Oh,
bit,
for sure,
right?
for sure,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
that
yeah. I agree.
disappointment of why am I not magically better? But then you hear those stories of like,
Yep.
oh, I was a drug addict for 50
And
years.
then overnight,
I got baptized, and then
yeah,
like the water washed all the nicotine out of all the meth was gone, and I didn't need it
right,
anymore. And you love
yeah,
those stories, and they're probably true, but for the majority of us, that is not the experience. Like we often confuse, I think, this idea of salvation, we confuse it with our sanctification.
oh yeah,
And so it kind of sets us up for
mm-hmm.
frustration. I'm not trying to rhyme. It just so happens that all of these
Good
words are
preacher
rhyming.
trick.
Yeah, I promise I'm not trying to do it. And so then you're having to help people be like, well, there's
Yeah,
really nothing wrong with you or your faith,
mm-hmm.
because that's the real issue, is that it's so disheartening.
Yeah. And it doesn't help sometimes to think like when you read the Bible. We've gone over this in previous weeks, but when you read the Bible, there's not, to my knowledge, there's not a lot of like progressive miracles that happen over time. It's like Jesus touches somebody and they're healed instantly.
Oh yeah,
And that's kind of how you conceptualize like what change is supposed to be. Is I was one way, I met Jesus, everything changed. Totally different person.
totally different person.
And that's just not, I think that could happen maybe, but that's like that's not the rule. Like that's the exception
For
in
sure.
my opinion, I guess.
What has been your experience of that? Is there like, well, first, super personal question.
Yeah.
In your sanctification process, what is the theme right now? What is God chipping
Oh
away
man.
on?
In different decades of my life, it feels like there have been different things. Teenage, 20s, lust, pornography, God rooting all those things out. And that was not something that happened overnight.
Yeah,
That's something that from my teens to my 20s to my 30s, it's like the itch remains like an addiction because that's what
right.
it was. It's like constantly sits back there. But in my 30s, I'd say the big thing that it feels like God is freeing me from, and we've talked some about this, just like fear of man.
Yeah,
I don't want to live my life constantly thinking, does this person like me? Am I enough? Do they love me? Am I this? Am I that? And it's like I'm so externally focused, and my prayer has been for the last, I'm 37 now. My prayer has been for the last probably 4 years or so
yeah,
that God would free me of that. And there's been areas He has, but man, when I say a daily thing, it's like I wake up in the morning and I got to center myself. And it's like, Jesus, my day is about you,
yeah.
and my worth comes from you, my value comes from you, it doesn't come from other people. It's a tricky thing, it's a hard thing.
But it is like, it is a daily practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm reminded of that scripture that says, take up your cross daily.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't like that. Like, I don't
No,
like that. I don't like the
no,
fact that I wake up every day and I recognize that we currently live in a history of God's working with humanity,
mm-hmm.
where we're saved, we're redeemed, but we perpetually live in this fallen world,
Oh
in
yeah,
this fallen state.
yeah,
And so our flesh is constantly going to be an issue.
yeah,
And the things that I feel like I should be over, I'm not. And I get mad at myself because
yeah,
I've dealt with them my whole life.
yeah. Do you ever look at your life and you're like, why am I not further along?
Oh, yeah.
Why am I still dealing with stuff that this has been like? Let's take fear of man for example.
Yeah.
I look over the course of my life. I'm almost 40 years old. Am I seriously still wondering what people think about me? That's a
Or
grade school thing,
yeah,
right?
or like, why do I even care? I don't even like this
Yeah, oh
person.
yeah, yes.
Why
Yes.
does their opinion matter so much to me?
Yeah.
For me, it's always mental health. It's always depression, anxiety,
Yes. I feel
blah blah
that.
blah blah
Get
blah.
that.
And those things you feel really guilty about, and preachers can go hard and be like, well, this is going so far as to say like your mental health state is
It's
sinful,
sinful. Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
it's a lack of trust in God, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think, well, I think for me there was a role that God used to play that in my life. Because when we talk, okay, so can we divide sin into different
Yeah.
categories
Yeah.
or
Come on.
whatever?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say some sins are better than others. I would never
Just for
say
the
that.
sake of the conversation.
But
Yeah.
for the sake of
Yeah. Yeah.
conversation, I recognize that there are sins that are like exist because I don't want to deal with them. So they're like addictions
Sure. Sure.
and seeking comfort and love and all these other things. But I think that all of us are prone to sins or specific sins because of something that God is doing in our lives. There's
Mm-hmm.
something about when He's knitting us in our mother's womb that there's an aspect of our personality and glorification
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that is going to be incredible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in a fallen world that like really works against you.
Yeah. Right.
And so, yeah, I have
Right.
terrible anxiety,
Yeah.
but in
Yeah.
my situation,
Yeah.
my hyper awareness kept me
Mm-hmm.
alive,
Yeah.
and so like, but I'm not in that situation anymore,
Uh-huh.
and I hate that my brain,
Yeah.
and my flesh, even though I've been redeemed from that situation, still acts as if I'm in. And that to me, like, does that make any sense
Oh
at
yeah.
all?
That's the
Yeah.
message. Like, and I love that you kind of teed this off by talking about how it feels like there's some sort of different categories, some different, like, kind of different elements to what makes up what's going on here. Because that's kind of how we started. It's like there are some folks, like not everything. I want to be careful when I say this. There's a variety of different reasons that people struggle.
For
Could be a
sure.
physical thing.
Right.
You got some kind of chemical imbalance, like the physical. There's some struggle there. They're
Right.
they're biologically hardwired to struggle with
Yeah.
something. Just kind of how it is, the way that they were put together. There's some folks that emotionally, this is me, I'm in this camp, emotionally kind of grew up and didn't deal with things in the proper way. And so
Right.
when life happens, emotions are all over the place. Internal compass is spinning around like crazy. So struggle emotionally sometimes. There's folks that relationally, they got bad, friendships that are dragging them down. But at the core, like one thing that's just it's just not talked about very often. And I love that we spent a good part of it in the message talking about this. The core of a lot of those things, like you can address those things with medication or therapies, or you can change your friendships or whatever.
Right.
But a lot of times there is like an underlying deeper spiritual thing that's going on. I don't want to overly spiritualize
Yeah.
this. I want to be careful of that. But that does seem to be one thing that's kind of often ignored is,
Right.
when somebody talks about, I want to start treating my spouse better, or I want to quit cussing, or I want to stop lashing out at folks. And they think, well, what I need to do is I just need to go to counseling. There's no doubt that's going to be helpful.
Right.
But if you kind of trace that back, it's like maybe, just maybe, there's like a spiritual element there. It's like you're not dealing with anger. You're
Yeah.
frustrated about something. You're bitter. You've made
You don't trust. You
you
don't.
don't trust. Exactly.
You want to be in control. You
Yeah.
want to,
Yeah.
like, there are all of these things that are just like, I should be surrendering to God, but in this area, I cannot let it go
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
too personal, too close,
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. And in the Power to Change series,
Yeah.
we were great about here's like the practical tools to build habits and change a routine, and that was great. It's all really useful.
Right.
But it's like you can only put so much lipstick on the pig. It's
Right.
like you're building this scaffolding when underneath this may be a spiritual issue
Right.
here. So you take care of everything else, but if you ignore the spiritual, a lot of those bad habits are just going to come back.
Yeah, because we want to be able to modify our behavior.
Yeah.
We just we just want to change our behavior. We're not looking for a new life.
Yeah.
We're just looking for to be more disciplined, be
That's right.
better.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
So I just want to be healthier.
Yeah.
I don't want to
Uh-huh.
I don't want to have to be a completely different person living a completely different life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to be able to not buy ice cream every time I'm at the grocery
Uh-huh.
store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want again we talked about this, but you want behavior modification, but what you're searching for, what you need is like a spiritual transformation.
Yeah.
You know?
You in
Gosh, that sounds like such preacher talk.
well, you're a preacher.
Yeah, but still, if somebody's asking about how do I change,
Yeah.
I'm not always leading with that.
Yeah.
So I want to be clear about that. I'm not sitting down always with somebody. It's like, well, are you ready to make Jesus Christ the Lord and Savior of your life?
Yeah.
I'm not leading with that.
I love how your Christian voice is cocky.
Right?
Yeah. So I don't go there immediately, but
Yeah.
that's fine. I usually do Southern.
There we go. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe I should have done that.
But that's it. That the key work is the grace of
Yeah.
Christ, the work of Christ on the cross,
Yeah.
and the grace that we receive. And how is that different than discipline?
Yeah, I think discipline aims to achieve. I mean, discipline's kind of in our hands, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like, I'm aiming to please. I'm aiming to be all that I can be. I'm aiming to, this is kind of the sin of the Pharisee, I guess. Is like I want to please God without God.
Yeah.
I want to do it on my terms.
Yeah.
know?
That's why we love discipline, because we
Yes,
get all the
'cause you get-
credit.
yes.
We get all the
You
credit.
control all
And this
that.
is what every addict knows. Every addict in recovery knows that there comes a point to where you have to admit that you cannot do this on your
I
own.
wasn't going there, but that is so good. That's so
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
And you just realize, like, I tried the discipline. If this were an issue of discipline,
Yeah.
I would be cured. I would be recovered. I would be whole. I would have beat this sin to death.
That's such a great thought.
Yeah, but that's not the nature of sin working in our lives. Like
Yeah.
we died in our transgressions, and how do dead men fight?
Yeah.
They don't.
They
They
don't.
can't.
Yeah. That's why, it has to begin with the transformation of the heart. On Sunday, we talked about that passage where, Jesus is like, hey, you need to cut off these limbs of yours in order to not have your whole soul thrown into hell. If your hand
Right.
causes you to sin, cut it off. Your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. And I love that, like, the heart behind that is, you can keep chopping all these things. You can gouge your eyes out. You can take your arm off. You can take your tongue out if that is what causes you to sin.
It's progressive.
Yeah.
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 You tell a great story.
You-
You tell that you say the guy was struggling with lust, so he cut his hand off.
Yep.
He was like, but I can still see, so he gouges his eye out, but I can still hear,
Yep.
so he
Yeah. Yes.
cuts his ear off.
Yes.
And
Keep cutting and cutting and cutting until you get to the root of your sin, which is your heart.
your heart.
And you can't do anything about that. That's where Jesus comes in. It's Jesus that says, I can offer you a new heart.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it. Like you nail it. It's not discipline. It's a different thing altogether.
Yeah.
It's the grace of God. Now, that doesn't mean that it's like I just sit on my hands. It's like God
Right.
God takes care
It's
of it
like
all.
it's like first we start with the grace, though. We start with, like, I'm powerless to this. I cannot do this without the grace of God. If this is going to be possible, it has to be the Holy Spirit working and me working in tandem with the Holy Spirit.
That's right.
And then that's what changes us. And you give this incredible example, which I think I stole and used in my sermon too,
Yeah.
of the
I forget his name.
Michael Jordan.
Yeah, Michael Jordan. What was the other
Yeah.
guy's name? Do you remember?
Stacy something?
Yeah, Stacy
Stacey,
something.
yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, he's like, Michael Jordan scores 69 points.
Mhm.
He scores 1,
Right.
comes back to the interview, and he says, Jordan and I combined for 70 points.
Yeah. Yeah.
70 points.
That's such a great thought, and I feel like it's just on the money for what we're talking about.
Right.
Here. It's like, you got on your own. Yeah, maybe you put up a point. Really, bring nothing to the table.
Right.
God does the heavy lifting.
Does the heavy lifting, and you get to participate in that. So what does that mean for just like the average person who in our congregation who's trying to quit smoking, for example, or someone who's, trying to be healthy, like me? I'm trying to get back on the monkey and make good choices
Yeah.
for my health and
Yeah.
and things like that. How does that practically help me in my life?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, there's a couple ways to look at this. So first, if it is a spiritual issue, like let's take addiction, like smoking or drinking, for
Okay.
example. I don't think he would mind me saying this, but a good friend of mine back home, last 15 years or so, has nursed this really bad habit of drinking.
Right.
Had a marriage that had dissolved, and it's just kind of the comfort that he found along the way was just drinking. And so he ended up. I saw him here recently. He kicked the habit,
Right.
and I was asking him, I was like, "How'd you do it?" And he's like, "Well, easy. I started smoking weed."
Yeah.
I'm like, "You just replaced
hilarious.
one bad habit with another."
Completely.
And so it's not, if somebody's like, practically, what does this mean for me? I would tell them, okay, if you're wanting to change, it's not just about removing a bad habit. I'm just going to quit doing this. There's got to be something greater that takes its place,
Right.
So you can't, or else you just swap one bad habit. You'll just find something else to put in that spot. So practically speaking, for somebody, it's like, I want to quit. I want to quit smoking. I want to quit drinking. Justin Howe over the Canton campus is a great example of this. Justin talks about how quit drinking. He was in our Power to Change series.
Right.
Justin quit drinking, and every time I talk to him, and I'm like, what was the secret sauce? What did it? So he tells me all the time. He's like, I never think about the future.
Yeah.
I never do it. He's like, all I do is just day by day focus on staying sober for today.
So like grace is sufficient for that
Exactly.
day.
Like I've filled that space with the grace of God. And for him, I imagine he thinks about like if he thinks about the future, that's a scary thing.
Yeah.
It's like, am I gonna stay sober forever? I hope, but
Yeah.
that's like a big commitment. But for him, it's like he's
I
boiled it
only
down to
have to
these.
be
Yeah,
I only have to be sober right now.
yeah,
And right now, like I can live in the grace of God right now.
yeah. So Rock, I think on the one hand, yeah, you need to have something greater to fill that space. But just to circle back, there's, if it's not a physical issue, if it's not an emotional issue, if it's not a relational issue, if it truly is a spiritual issue, and somebody, for instance, is drinking because, again, they had a marriage that dissolved, and it's the only way that they can find comfort and peace in their life,
Yeah.
then what I'm suggesting here is that you've got to deal with the comfort and peace issue
Yeah.
before you even touch getting rid of the bottle here. It's like, so practically speaking, it's not, okay, I'm going to stop drinking. I'm just going to go cold turkey on this. It's no, I'm going to start asking hard questions about, why do I feel lonely?
Yeah.
Where does my help come from? Where's peace? How's that manifested in my life? What is it that I'm running to? Like asking those questions, doing the deep dive and doing that work there.
Yeah. But we don't like to do that because that hurts.
No, that sucks.
Because
That just sucks. Yeah.
at the end of the day,
Yeah.
we're all kind of wired to,
Yeah.
and honestly, maybe 90% of our problems exist because we're kind of wired to just be comfortable.
Yeah.
We don't want to hurt. We don't want to be painful.
Yeah.
We don't want to deal with those things, which is why we have addictions and,
Sure.
I don't want to be rejected. That's why porn is a better option.
Right.
I don't want to, admit that I was wrong, which is, why anger is the better option.
Yeah, I went to a therapist a couple years ago, and when I was in his office, I told him when I walked in, this was my first session with him. I told him, I said, if you think that I'm going to sit on your couch and cry and talk about my dad, you're wrong. I've got this figured out. Like, I'm a pastor. I know the game. I know where you're leading me.
And then
and then an
that.
hour later, I'm on his couch and I'm crying and I'm like, I hate my dad. Like, that's the worst, And I'm trying to get to the root of, why do I feel this fear of man?
Right.
And what I wanted to do was, I want to be more confident.
Yeah.
Teach me to be more assertive.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. You don't get those things. Like, you don't
Right.
just get to get those behaviors. You got to go back and deal with the pain. And the way he described it is, he's like, what this is going to feel like today. You ever own like a snow globe?
Yeah.
Fish tank?
Mhm.
Okay. It's like in our fish tank that we have in our house for our kids, all the fish poop has settled at the bottom. The stuff is clear, but the water's clear, but that fish is swimming around in nasty water.
yeah.
Yeah. But if you shake it up,
Yeah.
oh, it's disgusting, the stuff that goes everywhere. And that's a little bit of like what that's like is you can go through life and feel like, this is normal. It's crystal clear in front of me what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
But when you choose to deal with stuff, you may end up feeling worse
Yeah.
for a little bit, like shook up until stuff starts to settle and you start to deal with like what the actual
And like
issues are.
that's the best part about grace though, is that if I go to Christ and I say these things, he already knows.
Yeah.
He's already seen my poop water.
He
Like he
loves your poop water.
I don't well, he loves me
He
in
loves you
spite
in
of
the yeah.
in spite of the fact that it exists.
This
And that's
illustration broke down
yeah,
really
and
quick.
I think that that's the beauty of grace in all of this is that I don't there's no pretense here.
Yeah.
There's no imagining, there's no pretending like I'm strong enough to do this. There's none. Christ requires none of that. The only requirement here is that I agree with him.
Uh-huh.
And I'm just like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
all of those things are true about me.
Mhm.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
And the conclusion of your sermon is literally the best part of the whole
You
thing.
think so?
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
When you say grace isn't about like
Oh, yeah.
figuring
Yeah,
it
yeah,
out,
yeah, yeah.
but grace gives me permission to keep trying.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
And like that's the key.
Mhm.
Grace gives me permission to keep trying.
Yeah.
And I don't have to be thwarted. I don't have to feel shame. I don't
Right.
have to
Right.
every time I mess up,
Yes.
grace enables me and gives me the strength to,
Yeah,
to keep trying.
It's exactly right. Like, it's not licensure to sin. Like, some people want to take that route and just be like, well, that's what grace is.
Yeah.
That ain't it. It's permission to try again.
Yeah.
100%, man. And you don't, love what you said. There's no pretense. I don't have to pay penance.
Yeah.
I have to beat myself up. I've said this to you before, nobody hates Jeremy Fisher like Jeremy Fisher. Like,
Right.
I light myself on fire over mistakes.
Yeah.
And when I look at the grace of God, it's like, why?
Yeah.
Why do you do that? So yeah, if this sermon wasn't important to anybody else, it was important to me.
Good.
Yeah.
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 Those are always the best.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining me again.
Yeah. Love you, dude.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.